This video is on file 3.3, describing phonological rules. First of all, we have to go over the definition. What are phonological rules? Phonological rules are used to describe the connection between phonemic and phonetic elements. A phonological rule has three parts. One is the sound or sounds affected by the rule. Two is the environment to which the rule applies. And third, the result of the rule. For example, in English, the voiceless alveolar stop is pronounced as the flap sound when it occurs after a stressed vowel and before an unstressed vowel. In this phonological rule, t is the sound affected by the rule, and after a stressed vowel and before an unstressed vowel is the environment, and the flapping is the result of the rule. And so instead of pronouncing the word as letter, we pronounce it as letter. And instead of pronouncing it as Seattle, we pronounce it as Seattle. Before we talk about phonological rules, let's first go over some natural classes of sounds, because sometimes to describe the phonological rules, we need to be talking about a class of sound instead of a single sound. A natural class is a group of sounds in English that share one or more articulatory or auditory properties to the exclusion of all other sounds in that particular language. And so when we try to identify a natural class, we look at the properties to describe the sounds and find their common qualities. For consonants, we look at voicing, place of articulation, and manner of articulation. And for vowels, we look at the sounds tongue height, tongue advancement, mouth rounding, and tenseness. For example, how do we describe the natural class of these sounds? P, b, k, d, k, g, and the glottal stop. If you look at their features in terms of voicing, you quickly discover that some of these are voiceless and the other ones are voiced. If you look at their place of articulation, you find out that some of these are bilabial sounds like p and b. Some of these are alveolar sounds like t and d. And some of these are velar sounds like k and g. And one of these is a glottal sound. And so we cannot describe them by voicing or place of articulation. But in terms of manner of articulation, they are all stops. And so the natural class of these sounds is they're all stops. Another example, how do we describe the natural class of the vowel sounds E and W? We look at their four features, right? Their tongue height, their tongue advancement, their mouth rounding, and tenseness. And after comparison, we know that these two are both high tense vowels, and this is their natural class. Some particular natural classes that are not readily available by simply looking at the sound's characteristics. And so linguists grouped them, and these are these particular groups. We have a natural class of sibilants. These are segments that have high-pitched hissing sound quality. Hissing sound quality is the sound that a snake makes. So sibilants include the voiceless alveolar fricative s, voiced alveolar fricative z, voiceless post-alveolar fricative sh, voiced post-alveolar fricative j, voiceless post-alveolar affricate ch, and voiced post-alveolar affricate j. We also have labials. Labials are the sounds that are made with the lip. So labials would include both bilabial and labial dental consonants, p, b, m, w, f, and v. Another natural class is obstruents. Obstruents are sounds that are made by blocking or limiting the airflow, which include the consonant classes of stops, fricatives, and affricates. And we also have a natural class that's called sonorants. Sonorants are sounds that are made with a relatively open passage for airflow, including consonant classes of nasals, liquids, and glides, as well as all vowel sounds. Okay, after we know the natural classes of speech sounds, let's talk about phonological rules. There are several phonological rules that apply to languages in the world, but we would be focusing on the English language. The first phonological rule is assimilation. This rule describes the process in which a sound, um, in terms of American Sign Language hand gesture, becomes more like a neighboring sound with respect to some phonetic property. An example of this is nasal place assimilation. This rule describes how the nasal sound n becomes more like the sound following it in terms of its place of articulation. So instead of pronouncing unbelievable, we usually pronounce unbelievable. And so the nasal n becomes m or in terms of place of articulation because the consonant after it is a bilabial sound. And so the alveolar nasal becomes the bilabial nasal. Unstable, the alveolar nasal didn't change because the next consonant is also an alveolar sound. But in terms of unclear, we don't usually say unclear, but unclear. For the nasal becomes more like an velar nasal. Palatalization is another assimilation process. It is the process in which a consonant becomes more like a neighboring palatal consonant. For example, instead of saying did you, we often say did you. And so the consonant d becomes more like the consonant ya. The following types of palatalization are t is often pronounced as ch if it's neighboring a palatal consonant. D is often pronounced as j. Sh is often pronounced as sh. K is often pronounced as ch. And g is often pronounced as j if they are neighboring the palatal consonant. And so another example would be instead of saying I'll text you later, we say I'll text you later. A second phonological rule is called dissimilation. This rule describes the process in which two close or adjacent sounds become less similar with respect to some property by changing one or both sounds. We don't have an example of this in English, but our textbook does provide examples of dissimilation in terms of manner dissimilation in the language of Greek. And you can look at that example on page 127 of our textbook. A third rule is insertion. This rule describes the process in which a segment not present at the phonemic level to be added to the phonetic form of a word. And in English, we have voiceless stop insertion. And this is between a nasal consonant and a voiceless fricative. A voiceless stop with the same place of articulation as the nasal is often inserted. And of course, not all English speakers do this, but there are a great number of native speakers of English do this. For example, dance is often pronounced by some speakers as dance. And so as you see, a voiceless stop t is inserted between the nasal n and the alveolar fricative s to ease the pronunciation. Okay. Similarly, hamster is often pronounced as hamster. So a stop p is inserted between a nasal m and a voiceless alveolar fricative s. How do you pronounce the word strength? Do you pronounce it as strength or strength? So in other words, do you insert the voiceless velar stop k between the nasal n and the voiceless interdental fricative th? A fourth phonological rule is deletion. This rule describes the process in which a sound that was present at the phonemic level um, and how that is eliminated at the phonetic form. For example, in English, we have H deletion, and this rule says the h sound may be deleted in unstressed syllables in fast speech. For example, in the utterance, he handed her his hat. If someone is speaking really fast and we know that her and his are unstressed, the H sounds may be deleted from these two words. And so we say he handed her his hat. A fifth phonological rule is called dissimilatory deletion in English. This rule says one or two close or adjacent sounds is deleted to make pronunciation easier. This happens a lot with the retroflex liquid sound because it's harder to make. You have to roll your tongue up. Okay, an example would be prerogative. The first R is deleted, so we say prerogative. In governor, the first R is also deleted, so that we say governor. And in the word library, the first R is deleted, so we say library. The sixth rule is called metathesis. This rule describes the process in which the order of sounds are changed. And our textbook, page 127, has an example from Ledi language, and you can look at our textbook to see that particular example. The seventh rule is strengthening. This rule describes the process in which sounds are made stronger. A particular example of strengthening in English is aspiration. The aspiration rule is that voiceless stops become aspirated when they occur at the beginning of a stressed syllable. For example, in the word pat and top, the voiceless stop p is aspirated and the voiceless stop t is also aspirated in the word top because that's stressed. An eighth rule is called weakening. This rule describes the process in which sounds are made weaker. In English, we have two weakenings. One is flapping. Flapping was our example before, right? An alveolar stop is realized as a flap when it's after a stressed vowel and before an unstressed vowel. In spelling, this is often realized in terms of double letters such as double T and double D. And so ladder becomes ladder. And we also have reduction of unstressed vowels as weakening. In unstressed syllables, the vowels are often pronounced as schwas. And so in the word Adam, when the first vowel is stressed, it's pronounced as the ash, ah. But in the word atomic, the stress changed from the first syllable to the second syllable in the word. And so the ash is reduced to a schwa. So in terms of, instead of saying atomic, we say atomic. Okay. These are the phonological rules. And if you have questions, please feel free to ask. It is important to remember that several of these phonological rules can be applied to the same word or to the same utterance. This means there may be one or more phonological rules at play at the same time on the same word. And you pay special attention to this when you are doing the exercise, when you are doing the homework exercise. For example, the word photograph, from the phonemic form, we have photograph, but in actual speech, we say photograph. And so we have two rules that are applied to this particular word, flapping and also vowel reduction.